There is a tree that holds 4,000 years of sweetness in its branches. Its golden pods contain 3 times as much calcium as milk. Its sugar feeds your gut bacteria instead of spiking your blood. And for millennia, it was the only sweetener desert civilizations ever needed. Then ranchers called it a weed. They burned it. They poisoned it. They cleared millions of acres to make room for cattle that would destroy the very land the tree had protected. In 1948, after decades of trying to kill it, the United States Department of Agriculture admitted defeat. They could not eradicate it. The roots went too deep. This is the story of the tree that sweetened life before sugar existed, and the sugar industry that tried to erase it from memory. Welcome to Silenced Seeds. The record opens in the Sonoran Desert near what is now Tucson, Arizona. Clay jars buried 4,000 years ago were found when archaeologists opened them in 1998. They found mesquite seeds perfectly preserved, still viable after 4 millennia. The people who stored them had no written language, but they understood something we have forgotten. In a land where corn withered and rivers turned to dust, this tree still gave fruit. It was a fortress of survival. The velvet mesquite, Prosopis velutina, evolved for one purpose: to thrive where nothing else could. Its roots reach over 100 feet into the earth, deeper than any well, deeper than drought can follow. Scientists discovered those roots can store up to 600 gallons of water, enough to survive a decade without rain. And the fruit it produces is a miracle of desert engineering. Each pod contains 35% natural sugar, complete protein, and soluble fiber that feeds beneficial gut bacteria. When ground into flour, it lasts for months without spoiling. When the desert air carried the scent of flowering mesquite, it smelled of caramel and smoke. The Tohono O'odham called it our sugar. The Pima knew its value. The Seri depended on it. For thousands of years, families gathered the pods as they fell like golden rain, crushing them into soft flour that fed entire villages through the harshest seasons. When Spanish explorer Alvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca arrived in 1535, he wrote of pods that tasted of honey itself. He watched families grind them into meal, baking cakes that sustained them through winter. They called it the Tree of Life. By 1541, another explorer documented forests stretching across the Rio Grande, canopies so dense they created their own shade ecosystems. Entire villages lived beneath their branches. The tree gave without asking anything in return. Now here is what makes this tree dangerous to the modern food system. In 1993, researchers at the University of Arizona analyzed mesquite pods and found something remarkable. The sweetness comes from fructosaccharides, plant sugars that feed beneficial gut bacteria instead of raising blood sugar. Mesquite has a low glycemic index, and it is safe for people managing diabetes. A teaspoon of mesquite flour sweetens coffee without a single energy crash. One researcher wrote, "It is the sugar that heals instead of harms." The pods contain 3 times more calcium than milk, and protein comparable to eggs. The fiber content promotes gut health in ways the Tohono O'odham understood intuitively 3,000 years ago. And unlike processed sugars that spike insulin and feed inflammation, mesquite flour delivers sustained energy, all from a tree that never needed irrigation, fertilizer, or human intervention. By 2005, health stores across the United States started selling mesquite sweetener. Prices jumped to $20 a pound. Chefs in Tucson and Santa Fe began baking mesquite bread and even making mesquite ice cream. The same fruit once burned by empire now sat on supermarket shelves beside maple syrup and honey. So what happened? How did a tree this valuable become classified as a pest? By the late 1800s, the land changed hands. Ranchers moved in with cattle, cotton, and conquest. To them, mesquite was not the tree of life. It was just a weed. Something in the way of profit. The colonial system brought sugarcane from distant islands. They built mills, plantations, systems of control. Mesquite, which grew freely without irrigation or ownership, had no place in that economy. You cannot patent a wild tree. You cannot sell fertilizer for a plant that makes its own. You cannot control a food source that belongs to no one and everyone. Millions of acres were cleared, trees cut to the ground. But mesquite does not surrender easily. Even when the trunk was severed, the roots remained silent, patient, waiting underground. They burned it to plant cotton. They poisoned it for wheat. But the roots went deeper than anyone guessed. Cut to the ground, mesquite returned. 10 new shoots for every trunk removed. The irony is tragic. Those European crops failed during long droughts, while the mesquite could have kept them alive. But a tree that feeds people for free represents lost profit for every industry built on scarcity. By the early 1900s, ranchers believed they had won. Millions of cattle roamed where mesquite once stood. They had turned wilderness into wealth, or so they thought. Within 20 years, the soil cracked like pottery. Rivers dried. The ground, stripped of its cover, blew away in the wind. Cattle began to starve, and the tree they had cleared, the tree they called a pest, started creeping back. Ranchers called it the invader, but it had been there for thousands of years before any fence or railroad. The United States Department of Agriculture launched decades of eradication campaigns. They poisoned it. They burned it. They declared war on a tree that was quietly healing the land beneath it. Then, in 1948, the USDA admitted defeat. They published what amounts to a surrender. Mesquite cannot be eradicated. The roots go too deep. The seeds remain viable in soil for over 40 years. A 1960 study in the Journal of Range Management found 60% germination after 4 decades underground. You cannot kill what refuses to die. But the suppression continued in subtler ways. Agricultural extension offices still teach ranchers to view mesquite as the enemy. Herbicide companies still sell chemicals specifically engineered to kill it. The sugar industry, worth $200 billion globally, has no interest in promoting a sweetener that grows wild and free. But it survived. It always survives. By the 1970s, ecologists gave mesquite a new name: keystone species. It became the silent engineer of the desert ecosystem. Its deep roots pull nitrogen from the air, a feat few plants can manage, and they feed it back into dead ground. Beneath its shade, grass began to grow again, wildlife returned, and the desert started breathing. What the world had called a weed had been quietly healing the land the entire time. Around 2012, a quiet movement began in the deserts of Sonora and Arizona. Indigenous farmers, elders, and food historians wanted to bring mesquite back from memory to life. They called it reclaiming the forgotten tree. Many still had old seeds passed down in jars, hidden for safety through generations. A Tohono O'odham farmer named Maria Lopez started planting them again in 2013 using her grandmother's methods. Within 2 years, her trees were covered in pods. She said the smell reminded her of childhood mornings when families roasted the pods for breakfast. By 2020, the conversation shifted. Global droughts were breaking records. In parts of California, farmland cracked. Wheat yields dropped by 40%. Scientists started asking one simple question: what survives when everything else fails? The answer pointed back to mesquite. NASA researchers studying sustainable crops noted how its roots can reach 200 feet underground, tapping water no other plant can touch. In 2021, Mexico's National Forestry Commission launched programs to replant mesquite across 300,000 hectares of degraded land. The Food and Agriculture Organization called it a forgotten crop of survival. The tree that ranchers tried to eradicate for a century is now being planted to save the future. You can grow what they silenced. Mesquite thrives in poor soil, survives drought, and asks for nothing. Harvest the pods in summer, grind them into flour, taste sweetness that has no crash, no spike, no corporate patent. Every tree planted is a vote against a food system built on scarcity. Every pod ground into flour is proof that the answers to tomorrow's hunger may already be growing in the soil beneath our feet. If this seed was finally freed for you, subscribe to Silenced Seeds and hit the bell. Every like and every share helps break the silence. The next seed breaks free soon.